There's a type of person that makes people uncomfortable. Not because they're loud, not because they're aggressive, not because they dominate conversations, but because they say nothing. They sit in silence while everyone else performs. They watch while others explain themselves. They observe while the room spins in social chaos. And here's what most people don't understand. That silence isn't weakness, it's calculation. The quietest person in the room isn't struggling to find words. They're deciding which words have power and which ones waste it. They've learned something most people never will, that in a world where everyone is desperate to be heard, silence is the most dangerous weapon you can wield. This video will reveal what quiet people know about human nature that loud people will never understand. And by the end, you'll see why the masters of power are rarely the ones talking. You're watching this because you felt it. That moment when you stayed quiet in a conversation and suddenly had more control than anyone speaking. That instant when you realized that the person asking all the questions holds more power than the one answering them. Most people are terrified of silence. They fill every gap with noise, with explanations, with performance. But you're different. You've sensed that there's a language beneath language, a game beneath the game, a form of power that operates in the spaces between words. This isn't common knowledge. This is what strategists, observers, and manipulators understand about human nature that performers never see. You're about to learn why quiet people see more, control more, and win more without ever raising their voice. Drop the word observe in the comments if you've ever learned more by staying silent than by speaking. Let's see who's been paying attention. Principle 1. The power of strategic absence. Here's the first truth quiet people understand. Your absence creates more value than your presence. When you're always available, always responding, always engaging, you become furniture. People stop noticing you because you're always there. But the moment you withdraw, the moment you go silent, the moment you remove your attention, people scramble. They wonder what they did wrong. They question their value. They reach out to pull you back in. This is the principle of scarcity applied to human attention. The person who speaks constantly has no mystery, no leverage, no power. But the person who disappears strategically, who withholds their voice, their approval, their presence, they become valuable simply by being unavailable. Machiavelli understood this. He wrote that a prince should never reveal all his intentions, never be fully known, never be completely accessible. Because the moment you're fully understood, you're controllable. Quiet people know this instinctively. They don't explain themselves. They don't defend their choices. They don't justify their silence. They simply withdraw and let the world interpret the void. And here's what happens. People project their own fears, insecurities, and assumptions into that silence. They convince themselves that you're upset with them, disappointed in them, judging them, when in reality, you're just observing. So, here's the application.
Stop being so available. Stop responding immediately to every message, every question, every demand for your attention. Let there be gaps. Let there be silence. Let people wonder. Because the moment they start wondering about you, you've already won. But here's the warning. This only works if your silence is intentional, not reactive. If you're quiet because you're afraid, insecure, or unsure, people will sense it. But if you're quiet because you're calculating, observing, deciding, they'll fear it.
Principle 3. The discomfort advantage. Quiet people weaponize discomfort. Most people are so terrified of awkward silence that they'll say anything to fill it. They'll overshare. They'll confess. They'll negotiate against themselves, all because they can't handle the tension of an unanswered question or an unfinished sentence. But quiet people? They've trained themselves to sit in that discomfort. They'll ask a question and then go silent, completely still. No follow-up, no softening, no saving the other person from the weight of the moment. And what happens? The other person cracks. They start talking. They start explaining. They start revealing things they never intended to say. This is a tactic used by interrogators, therapists, and master negotiators. It's called tactical silence. You create a vacuum, and human psychology abhors a vacuum. People will fill it, usually with truth they wouldn't have offered otherwise. Machiavelli advised leaders to master the art of making others uncomfortable without appearing hostile. To create situations where people reveal themselves not through force, but through psychological pressure they can't even identify. That's what quiet people do. They don't attack you. They don't argue with you. They don't challenge you. They just stop talking. And in that silence, you start to unravel. Here's the application. The next time someone asks you a difficult question or makes an unreasonable demand, don't respond immediately. Just look at them. Stay quiet. Let the discomfort build. Watch how quickly they backtrack, how fast they soften their position, how desperately they try to fill the silence with concessions. You didn't have to say a word. The silence did the work for you. But here's the danger. If you use this too often, people will catch on. They'll recognize the pattern. They'll realize you're using silence as a weapon. So deploy it strategically, sparingly, at moments when it will have maximum impact. Principle 4. Emotional invisibility. Quiet people understand something profound about human nature. People can only manipulate the emotions they can see. If you're loud, expressive, reactive, everyone knows how to move you. They know what makes you angry, what makes you defensive, what makes you crumble. But if you're quiet, if your face reveals nothing, if your silence gives no indication of what you're feeling, you're unreadable. And what people can't read, they can't control. This is the principle of emotional opacity. The Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. Quiet people have mastered internal regulation. They feel everything, but they show nothing. When someone insults them, there's no visible reaction. When someone tries to provoke them, there's only calm. When someone pushes for a response, there's only silence.
And that silence is terrifying because it means their manipulation isn't working. Think about how people operate. They test you. They probe for emotional weak points. They say things designed to get a reaction. And if you react, you've just shown them exactly how to hurt you next time. But if you stay quiet, if you absorb the blow without flinching, they don't know what to do with you. You've denied them the feedback they need to calibrate their attack. Here's how you apply this. Practice controlling your immediate reactions. When someone says something that would normally trigger you, pause. Don't defend. Don't explain. Don't react. Just observe your own emotional response internally and then choose whether to express it. Most of the time, you'll find that silence is the most powerful response because it forces the other person to either escalate, which makes them look unhinged, or retreat. Either way, you maintain control. But here's the warning. Emotional invisibility can be lonely. When you stop showing people how you feel, they stop knowing how to connect with you. So reserve your emotional transparency for the rare few who've earned it. For everyone else, mystery is power. Principle 5. The observer's advantage. Here's what quiet people see that loud people miss. Social dynamics. While everyone else is performing, competing for attention, trying to be heard, quiet people are watching the show. They're noticing who interrupts whom, who defers to whom, who's pretending to agree but secretly resents it. They're seeing the alliances, the tensions, the unspoken hierarchies, and they're using that information. Robert Greene wrote in The 48 Laws of Power, "When you show yourself to the world and display your talents, you naturally stir all kinds of resentment, envy, and other manifestations of insecurity." Quiet people avoid this trap entirely. They don't display, they don't perform, they don't broadcast their intelligence or their insight. They just watch. And in watching, they accumulate power that performers never access because they see the game that everyone else is too busy playing to notice. Think about a room full of people arguing about a decision. The loud ones are fighting for their position, defending their ego, trying to win. But the quiet one in the corner, they're noting who's rational, who's emotional, who's actually influential, and who just thinks they are. And when the room finally turns to them and asks, "What do you think?" they speak with devastating precision, because they've watched the entire battlefield before making a single move. Here's the application. Stop competing for attention. Let others fight for the spotlight. Let them exhaust themselves trying to be heard. While they're performing, you're learning. And when it's time to act, you act with information they don't have. You see the leverage points they missed, the alliances they didn't notice, the weaknesses they exposed while trying to look strong. That's the observer's advantage. But here's the twist. People underestimate you when you're quiet. They assume you have nothing to contribute, that you're passive, uninterested, maybe even unintelligent. And that's exactly where you want them. Because when they underestimate you, they don't see you coming.
Principle 6. Silence as social dominance. This one is counterintuitive but true. The person who can hold silence in a social setting dominates that setting. Not because they're aggressive, not because they're loud,
but because they're comfortable with what everyone else fears. Most people experience silence as rejection, as judgment, as failure. When a conversation dies, they panic. They scramble to revive it. They fill the void with anything, jokes, stories, questions, just to avoid the discomfort. But quiet people, they let it sit. They're perfectly comfortable in the absence of noise. And that comfort signals something primal, confidence. Animals do this. The alpha in a pack doesn't need to constantly assert dominance. It just exists, calm and unbothered, and everyone else adjusts around it. Humans are the same. The person who's comfortable in silence is signaling, I don't need your validation. I don't need to fill space to justify my presence. I'm secure in my value. And people respond to that. They defer to it. They respect it. They unconsciously submit to it. Machiavelli observed that people respect those who seem indifferent to their approval. The moment you need someone's validation, you've given them power over you. But the moment you're indifferent, completely comfortable whether they approve or not, you've taken that power back. Here's how you apply this. Practice being the last person to speak in a group. Let the conversation unfold. Let others fill the space. Don't rush to contribute. And when you do speak, make it count. Say something precise, something insightful, something that shifts the entire dynamic. Then go quiet again. Watch how the room reorients around you. People start looking to you for approval, for reaction, for validation. Not because you demanded it, but because you demonstrated that you don't need it. But here's the danger. This only works if your silence comes from genuine confidence, not from anxiety. If you're quiet because you're afraid to speak, people will sense it. But if you're quiet because you're choosing when to deploy your words, that's power. Principle 7. Control through ambiguity. Quiet people understand that clarity is a gift, and gifts should be given selectively. When you're ambiguous, when people can't quite figure out what you're thinking, what you want, what you mean, they're forced to guess. And in guessing, they reveal themselves. They project their assumptions onto you. They try different approaches to get a read on you. They negotiate with themselves about what you might be thinking. And all the while, you're learning exactly how they think. This is why the most powerful people are often the hardest to read. They give vague answers. They respond with questions. They leave conversations without closure. Not because they're confused, but because ambiguity is control. The more certain you are, the more predictable you are, and predictability is weakness. Here's the application. Stop being so explicit about your intentions. When someone asks what you think, don't give them a full answer. Give them a fragment, a hint, a direction without a destination. Let them wonder. Let them interpret. Let them work to understand you. Because the moment they're working to figure you out, you've reversed the power dynamic. You're no longer seeking their approval. They're seeking your clarity. But here's the warning. Too much ambiguity, and people will stop trying. They'll write you off as cryptic, weird, or not worth the effort. So calibrate carefully. Be clear when clarity serves you. Be ambiguous when ambiguity creates leverage. The key is control, knowing exactly when to reveal and when to conceal.
Principle 8. The power of selective vulnerability. Here's where it gets subtle. Quiet people don't reveal nothing. They reveal strategically. They understand that occasional vulnerability, deployed at the right moment, creates disproportionate trust and loyalty. But it has to be calculated. Most people overshare. They trauma dump. They confess everything, thinking it builds connection. And sometimes it does, but it also removes all mystery, all power, all leverage. Quiet people do the opposite. They're silent 90% of the time, but that one moment when they share something real, something personal, something vulnerable, it lands like a bomb, because it's rare. People treasure what's scarce, and if you're someone who rarely opens up, the moment you do becomes invaluable to the person receiving it. They feel chosen, special, trusted, and that creates loyalty you can't buy with constant availability. This is why CEOs, leaders, and strategists often have one or two people they confide in, and everyone else gets the professional mask. It's not that they're cold, it's that they understand the economics of intimacy. Here's the application. Be selective about who gets access to your inner world. Don't share your struggles, your doubts, your vulnerabilities with everyone. Reserve that for the few people who've earned it. For everyone else, maintain the quiet, maintain the mystery. Because when you do choose to open up, even slightly, it will mean something. And meaning is power. But here's the twist. Even your vulnerability should serve a purpose. You're not opening up to unload. You're opening up to create a bond, to gain loyalty, to build an alliance. Cold? Maybe. Effective? Absolutely. Principle 9. Silence as punishment. This one is dark, but true. Quiet people know that one of the most devastating things you can do to someone is withdraw your attention completely. Not with anger, not with drama, not with explanation, just silence. No response, no acknowledgement, no energy. It's called the gray rock method in psychology, originally designed to deal with manipulative people. But strategists use it offensively. When someone crosses a boundary, disrespects you, or tries to manipulate you, you don't argue, you don't defend, you don't engage. You go quiet. And that silence communicates more than any argument ever could. It says, "You're not worth my words. You're not worth my energy. You're not worth my time." And for most people, that's unbearable. They'll scramble to re-engage. They'll apologize, not because they understand what they did wrong, but because they can't handle being invisible to you. Machiavelli wrote that a prince should be feared rather than loved if he cannot be both. But he also understood that the worst punishment isn't violence, it's irrelevance. And silence makes people irrelevant. Here's the application.
When someone violates your boundaries, don't explain why you're upset. Don't argue, don't defend yourself, don't justify. Just stop engaging. Let them sit in the absence of your attention. Most of them will correct themselves without you saying a word. And if they don't, you've learned they don't value access to you, which means they never deserved it in the first place. But here's the danger. This tactic is nuclear. Use it sparingly. Use it only when someone has genuinely disrespected you in a way that requires consequence. Because once you deploy it, there's no going back to the relationship as it was.
Principle 10. The final truth. Silence is sovereignty. Here's what all of this comes down to. Quiet people have reclaimed something most people gave away without realizing it: control over their own voice. They don't speak because they're expected to. They speak when it serves them. They don't explain because someone asked. They explain when it benefits them. They don't perform because the room demands it. They observe until action is required. And in doing so, they've opted out of the social game that exhausts everyone else. While others are competing for attention, approval, validation, quiet people have realized that none of that matters. What matters is sovereignty. The ability to be completely comfortable in your own silence, to need nothing from the noise, to exist fully without external confirmation. That's freedom. And freedom is the ultimate form of power. Because the person who needs nothing from you cannot be controlled by you. The person who's comfortable in silence cannot be manipulated by social pressure. The person who observes without performing cannot be predicted, managed, or outmaneuvered. They've removed themselves from the game entirely, not by quitting, but by playing on a level most people don't even see.
The quietest person in the room isn't the weakest. They're the one who's already decided. They've calculated the room, measured the players, identified the leverage points, and they're waiting. Not because they're afraid to act, but because they understand that premature action is wasted action. So they sit in silence while everyone else performs, debates, and exhausts themselves trying to be heard. And when the room finally turns to them, when the noise dies down and someone asks, "What do you think?" they speak once, with precision, with clarity, with devastating effectiveness. And the entire dynamic shifts. Because they didn't need to be loud to be heard. They just needed to be right. Silence isn't weakness. It's the language of those who've already won. And if you've learned to speak it, you're no longer playing the same game as everyone else. You're playing a different game entirely. One where words are weapons, silence is armor, and observation is the only strategy that matters. Welcome to the quiet side of power. Most people will never see you coming, and that's exactly how you win.